All right, Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, getting you set for championship weekend. We move to the ACC, where Clemson arrives against an unexpected opponent in Pitt, finishing off a 7-5 campaign with a 24-3 loss against Miami. We bring in Ryan Cantor from Shakin' the Southland to help us break down the Tigers and the Panthers. Ryan, we appreciate you stopping by. The first thing that comes to mind in that rivalry game that you just finished off against South Carolina, even though it was a 21-point win, was the yardage gained by the Gamecocks against what's considered to be an elite defense, them moving the ball inside the 10-yard line, I believe inside the 5, a couple times in which they went for it, didn't score. So the yardage figures were pretty amplified for the Gamecocks. Your thoughts about Clemson's defense and any concerns on that side of the ball?
Yeah. Coming into the year, we knew that Clemson's secondary was going to be a question, and we saw that in this game, as well as their linebacker coverage. They were without starting middle linebacker Trey Lamar. So J.D. Davis had an interception, who was his replacement. So really hard to say how much that impacted things. But yeah, I mean, they certainly exposed some issues, especially over the middle and deep over the middle with post routes and whatnot. Their tight end, who they seldom used, ate us up pretty good. So those are all problems. But, you know, the good thing is we have Brent Venables as our defensive coordinator. So you got to think a lot of that will get fixed. And it's probably a good thing, despite it being on tape for opponents to exploit. It's probably a good thing that they can get corrected now rather than trying to deal with this against a team like Notre Dame or Alabama. Also, you know, Clemson fans aren't going to love me saying this, but you got to give some credit to Will Muschamp and the Gamecocks. Great game plan. They didn't even bother to try to run the ball. They knew they weren't going to be able to, and they kind of made their piece of that up front and didn't pretend like they were going to be able to run the ball. They passed it, used exotic formations. They attacked all of Clemson's weaknesses. They leaned heavily on their best player, Deebo Samuel. It was a great game plan. I don't know that there's anything they could have done possibly to win the game except pray and get lucky on top of everything they did. Their defense is banged up and not good. But I thought it was a great game plan, and you know, I think Will Muschamp deserves a lot of credit for keeping it as close as he did.
Because if you survey the schedule, I think aside from North Carolina State and Florida State having some talent on the perimeter, basically you go to the Syracuse game and you go to the game at Texas A&M, where they really have some freakish receivers on that side of the ball that really gave Clemson some fits. And so that seems to be maybe the kryptonite right now.
Well, the Texas A&M game early in the season, and Kellen Mond played just an unbelievable game. So, you know, that's one of the situations where a quarterback just plays out of his mind, and, you know, you give him credit, but to some extent you have to kind of temper how much you're going to, you know, penalize the defense for that. There were some completions that probably should have been interceptions. It was a little wonky, to say the least. So, you know, aside from it being week 2, I don't worry about that one as much. But yeah, I mean, I would say the linebackers and coverage and safeties over the middle and those post routes have been a weakness. But I think with what we have coming up against Pittsburgh is a favorable matchup. We'll see if they try to exploit that. I don't think they're well equipped to exploit those particular weaknesses. So we won't know how well Clemson cleaned them up. But if it's still a problem, you know, now that it's on tape, then you'll be really concerned that Pittsburgh's exploiting it. But I wouldn't expect to see that this week.
Well, as you reference the matchup, why don't we stay on that side of the ball? Because Pitt brings the type of approach on offense that we would expect Pat Narduzzi to bring. They got kind of off their game plan a couple of years ago, in which they had Matt Canada as the offensive coordinator. They had a porous defense. They threw the ball all over the place, and it wasn't what we had expected Pat Narduzzi to bring to Pitt football. Now, this is the team that we would expect. Maybe not necessarily from a quality standpoint, but they slug out a division title, and they do it by just running the football and playing decent defense, not great defense. So let's stay on that side of the ball, with Clemson having to defend a team that now is going to be the inverse, at least in regards to what they typically do. They're a very lunch pail sort of team, with two guys that are going to gain near or over 1,000 yards.
Quadri Allison and Darren Hall will both end up with 1,000 yards this season. Both very good running backs, both averaging over 6 yards a carry. They have 19 rushing touchdowns between them. They're very good running backs. They're the 13th best rushing offense in the country per S&P Plus. And their passing offense is not very strong. So that's what I was alluding to before. Is I don't know how much they can or how much they will try to exploit those weaknesses that or flaws that South Carolina exposed. But I think what's interesting about this matchup is Clemson hasn't faced a rushing offense quite this good this year. And that's not even a knock on the schedule. I mean, this is the 13th best rushing offense in the country. It's really, really good. Clemson's the number 2 behind Michigan State, the number 2 rushing defense in the country. So we're going to see, how good is that really? I mean, the stats are very helpful, but now you're going to see a great rushing offense against a great rushing defense. I believe that Clemson's rushing defense is as good as the numbers indicate, and they'll force them to try to pass to beat them. I don't think that Kenny Pickett can do that against this defense. But, now we're really going to get a true test. And I think it's nice and it's helpful to see, a great rushing offense. It's still not as good as Alabama's. So good test for Clemson there in that regard.
And the Pitt statistics not inflated by a porous non-conference schedule. They didn't play the greatest defenses in the world, but Notre Dame is certainly very capable. Penn State's good. Central Florida obviously wins on offense, but it's still a decent team rather than playing, 2 FCSs and a couple group of 5 type teams. They had the most difficult, in my estimation, the most difficult non-conference schedule in the country, and it kind of toughened them up possibly for ACC play. Kenny Pickett, quarterback, as you mentioned, he actually emerged this time last year with an upset in Pittsburgh against a Miami team that won the Coastal. Kind of the inverse happened this year where Pitt showed up in Miami having already won the Coastal and lost to Pitt. But Kenny Pickett with a year under his belt, but he's a pretty pedestrian quarterback, but may need to go to the air a little bit more often this Saturday.
Yeah, he's more of a game manager. And in our Q&A that we did this week, it's up on shakingthesouthland.com now. We spoke to the folks over at Cardiac Hill, and they kind of mentioned that he had 5 interceptions in just his first couple games, hasn't thrown one since. He's certainly been a game manager, not averaging a whole lot of passing yards per game. I think it's about 150-ish. On the season, and it's 158 over his last handful of games. So still not, picking up a lot of yardage, but he's a good, careful game manager. The thing is, if we're able to take away the running game for them, which is what they've leaned on all year, it's essentially been the basis of who they are, then I think they're in trouble. I don't think they have a real alternative after that. Their offensive line's a very good run blocking offensive line, but it's not a very good pass blocking offensive line. They're tied for 78th in the country with 78 sacks allowed. Meanwhile, Clemson is tied for 2nd in the country with 43 sacks. So if they do have to start dropping back and passing, I think that's where they get into trouble. We're just going to have to see Clemson's great defensive line against what's actually a very, very good rushing attack.
Ryan, you referenced the defensive line. I don't know that they could have lived up to expectations entering this season. So what's your assessment of the defensive line? Because we expected it to be all-time great. Did it reach those expectations?
I just don't think they were quite as flashy as, as you alluded to, it's impossible to meet those expectations. And you think back to the Auburn game last year when they racked up, I think it was 11 sacks in one game, and it was just outrageous. They didn't quite have a game like that, but number 2 rushing defense, number 2 in sacks. I don't know how much more you could really expect to be that well-rounded and dominant. When the offense had struggled, the defense was there, and oftentimes games didn't feel in jeopardy. The Duke game is a great example. Clemson was down 6-0, but you didn't even worry because you just knew they weren't going to be able to get a touchdown, and Clemson's offense would figure it out. And that's the beauty of having a fantastic defensive line. Also goes back to what we're talking about with struggles in the secondary. A great D-line covers a lot of that up. So I think they've been excellent. I think the hype was so great that nothing could live up to that hype. And they haven't been particularly flashy, but they've been outstanding, and I think it's the best defensive line in the country.
And moving to offense, Trevor Lawrence has completely changed the equation on what needs to be expected from this defense. The early season approach was let's win with defense, do enough on offense, and that completely switched the time at the point in which he took over the offense. And he's just been, the games that I've seen, he doesn't look like a freshman. The arm talent's exceptional. He looks poised. He's making the right decisions. He's just playing out of his mind most of the time.
Yeah, and he's gotten better since he's taken over. He had some early struggles with kind of pocket presence and feeling when he needed to escape or get rid of the ball. Tried to do too much in that Syracuse game and took a nasty hit, strained his neck, and luckily we won the game with backup Chase Bryce, who was, had a heroic drive there. But those type of things is what he's improved on. And Coach Sweeney just won ACC Coach of the Year, and I think the way he handled the quarterback situation is one huge reason why he deserves that award. Obviously, going 12-0 makes it hard to debate, but I think that the situation at quarterback and how he made such a tough decision, handled it so well, handled the locker room, and now you look at where this team is now versus where they could be had it not been handled well, or had Trevor Lawrence not had all this experience. I think that's a huge part of the season, and Trevor Lawrence has totally changed who this team is.
Yeah, and you combine him actually getting reps against live action, and then also getting the first team reps in practice with the starting wide receivers at some point when he didn't have that throughout the summer into fall camp. Travis Etienne has been exceptional. I believe he's got the best yards per carry average in this history of the school.
Yeah, I believe it's about 8 right now.
Yeah, so he's remarkable. The outside receivers get a setup for those folks that may be watching Clemson for the first time coming up Saturday night in regards to skill position players and who's going to be the dynamic game-changing guys.
Yeah, so you obviously have Hunter Renfrow in the slot. He's a senior. Some of the best hands in the conference and really shifty, a really crisp route runner. I think an NFL talent in that regard as well. On the outside, we have 2 guys now, whereas last year I'm not sure we really had one whole guy. We had T. Higgins kind of emerging, but he got hurt against Alabama. He was a freshman. Yeah, Deion Kane, but he played that 9 or kind of the tall receiver role, but that wasn't necessarily a totally natural fit for him, I don't think. And now you have T. Higgins, who's really come into his own. Great deep ball threat. You can kind of throw to the back shoulder or throw the fade in the end zone. And you have freshman Justin Ross, who has outstanding chemistry with Trevor Lawrence, who's averaging almost 20 yards per catch, most on the team. Those two, sometimes on the field at the same time, are just a deadly duo, and allows Clemson to be really, really tough to defend because, as you mentioned, Travis Etienne averaging about 8 yards per carry, and then those guys, that's tough. Not to mention you have Hunter Renfrow over the middle. So we can attack in a lot of different ways, which last year we just didn't have hardly any of that.
And for those of us who aren't totally into the drama of National Signing Day, if I remember correctly, Justin Ross was slated by most to be going elsewhere, whether that was Georgia.
I believe that was Auburn or Alabama.
Okay, but turned out to be Clemson at the last minute. Here we are 7-8 months later, and he's starring for the number 2 team in the nation.
Yeah, I mean, you seldom there's only so many recruits that are going to come in and make such a huge impact, but that's, people say, the stars don't matter and all that, and oftentimes they don't. Hunter Renfrow was a walk-on, but by and large, when you look at the numbers in aggregate, they do make a difference. And you have a guy like Justin Ross, is a 5-star freshman, already making an impact. On the defensive end, you have a 5-star Xavier Thomas, a DN who's already doing a great job rushing the passer. 3 stars often pan out. They're great, and if they have high character and work ethic, then Clemson will take them too. But those 5 stars are the ones who can come in and make an impact immediately. And Clemson's taken smaller classes than they probably would have liked to. So it's a really been a great thing that some of these guys can make an impact so quickly. It's really given Clemson a lot of depth.
Got Ryan Cantor on the line from Shaking the Southland. It's the SB Nation platform for Clemson athletics. Ryan, let's hit on special teams because it's probably not going to matter this Saturday. 26-point favorite, according to Vegas, and the line has been very close to what Clemson's been able to do against recent opponents. But the times that I've tuned in, the special team issues have jumped up from time to time. And again, it may be the difference between winning by sky's the limit 40 points or winning by 35 this week. But into the college football playoffs, those special teams issues could come to roost. So where do we stand there?
Yeah, Clemson's special teams at times has been a weakness. Per the S&P Plus, we ranked 92nd in special teams. Greg Hugel, our kicker, missed a kick last week. Our punter, Will Spires, he just hasn't had a long average. Some ducks and some just not a whole lot of booming booming punts. Fortunately, the offense has been so good he doesn't have to punt a whole lot. But yeah, I mean, it's certainly a weakness. There was the punt touchdown allowed to Boston College a couple weeks ago. Yeah, I mean, it's a weakness for sure. And, in this game, I don't think it'll hurt too much. But it could. It certainly could, particularly in other games. So, yeah, I think it's a weakness, one that Clemson worked to overcome. Luckily, their punt return game has improved throughout the season. So at least that's looking better with Amari Rodgers ever since he dropped that punt against Syracuse. But since then, it's been looking better.
Okay, Ryan, the ACC as a conference cannot be happy about these championship games and the division alignment and what is being produced by each side in terms of competitive balance. So we've got a 26-point spread here, and this is a Power 5 championship game. Last year, we had a Miami team that we expected to compete better. They lost 35-3. North Carolina and Virginia Tech did compete well against Clemson those two seasons in 2015 and 16. They were generally one-score games. They were in the range of competing in the fourth quarter. They were decent games, but there was little doubt that Clemson was going to win the game. Before that, of course, it was a Florida State-run Atlantic, and they would typically move on and beat the likes of a Duke and a Georgia Tech. So it's been a long time since the Coastal Division, and that was when it was Virginia Tech's division, was able to compete with the Atlantic. And it's not a very good entertainment product on a Saturday night when you're wrestling against the Big Ten, in particular in terms of television ratings. And you've got a 7-5 Pitt team taking on a team that's considered one of the two best in the country.
Yeah, I'm not going to disagree with you yeah, I think you're right. I mean, Clemson Pittsburgh's, like you said, 26-point spread. I don't think it's, an overly intriguing game. It certainly doesn't stack up in any way to a Georgia-Alabama type game. But, the ACC can only do so much. I mean, do you realign divisions to take care of it? You look at Georgia-Alabama, if they had been in the same division, obviously maybe Georgia has 2 losses, but if Georgia has that 1 loss to Alabama and doesn't have to play them again, maybe they get in. Right now they're staring at an elimination game because the West has such a good team. So you kind of can debate what's best for the conference and what's not. Moving Clemson or Florida State to the other division might not be viable because those two teams probably need to play every single year. And having them play as cross-division rivals and then potentially again in a championship may not be best for the conference either. And you look across the rest of the conference, and really any other realignment doesn't fix this, right? You can put Louisville in the other one. Well, they're terrible this year. Who from the Atlantic are you really going to move to the Coastal that's going to solve that issue whenever Clemson or Florida State's at the top of their game? There's really nobody else except for the other Clemson or Florida State who's going to make a super, super compelling game. So I don't know that there's much solution until there's expansion or Notre Dame joins or something like that.
Yeah, there really can't be a knee-jerk reaction just based on the current status of the league, although we would expect those two schools to be the cream of the crop long-term, Clemson and Florida State. Miami's a bit of a wild card. We would expect them to come back at some point, but it just hasn't happened. Virginia Tech's usually decent. They're good. They're solid, but maybe they've nestled into that 7 or 8 win type of program feel. And then you've got a number of teams that you can count on typically being either at the bottom or you can count on them not progressing enough to be a factor, like a Wake Forest. They're decent now. They've turned into a decent program, but they're not a factor. So it would be difficult to distribute the teams any way in a different matter in which it would make sense. But I just think it's somewhat of an issue for the league if this continues, and we've got a bit of a trend going right now with Clemson and then everyone else.
Yeah, I mean, I would expect it to continue at least for the next couple of years. We'll see if Florida State can reemerge, and there will be 2 great teams in the Atlantic, and then you basically have an ACC championship game when those 2 teams play, which is how it was for several years beforehand. That was extremely compelling. It just happened to not be on championship weekend, and then we'll see if conferences expand when these contracts expire and the TV rights expire, and they figure out what they're going to do with the playoff, if they'll just leave it or change it. What Notre Dame's going to do with all that. So, but yeah, I think for now it kind of is what it is.
So Ryan, you thought Florida State and Clemson owning the conference was compelling us all knowing that they were playing, let's say, the third week of October, and that was the game, and now it's over, and
I
we
think
know
it
who's
was
going
one
to
of
win
the
the
best.
ACC.
I think it was the closest thing you saw to Alabama versus LSU since then.
I would agree with that.
And I think that was the conference's best product that they've had to offer in a long time.
All right, good stuff. Who knows what will happen, although we have a pretty much of a 98% certainty with Clemson taking on Pitt in the ACC championship game. The Panthers as a 26.5-point underdog. Ryan Cantor from Shaking the Southland breaking down the Clemson football situation as they head toward the college football playoffs. Ryan, we appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for inviting me.